You're welcome again to another edition of Searching the Heart. Today I would want to look at something very, very interesting, again continuing on the series of Science and the Bible. Okay. I've been putting it off. I've mentioned it once or twice, but I've not been able to actually do a very in-depth deep dive. I will try to do that. Of course, this will require a lot of scientific data to be able to do it very well. But today I'm going to be concentrating on the biblical evidence that backs the scientific data that we have when it comes to the existence of our world today. Okay, what is the scientific, anthropological, and geological data that we can glean from the Bible when talking about the earth we have today? And this, for me, is a legitimization of the pursuit of exploration, especially space exploration. Already humanity has spent thousands of years exploring the Earth's surface itself. That is a mandate, and this is unavoidable. Okay, this is unavoidable, as recorded for us, of course, in Genesis 1 verse 24 to 26. Okay, and so it's unavoidable. But we are going a step further. We have gone a step further to explore even the moon, outer space, and the moon. Okay, it is a complex issue to discuss why some people openly deny that we have done so. Of course, because human beings are complex, especially because of the maturity of video technology. Of course, we could not avoid that video technology matured even way before we attempted to go to the moon. Without it, of course, it would be a limited expedition. Okay, so of course there is that doubt that have we actually done so. Okay, just like there is doubt that Columbus actually explored the Americas and discovered the Americas, of course, because of the historical data involved. Okay, there's always going to be doubt because there are only a limited amount of people who witnessed the event, participated in the event, and are able to record the event for us. This is just a little out of the doubt that postmodernism brings to the table because of this limitation in people who witness an event and people who actually participate in it. Okay, the other aspect of the doubts are from, of course, phenomenological concerns. Okay, the nature of things, existential concerns, rather. Okay, so these are some of the things. Okay, if we're living in a simulation, of course, it doesn't matter whether we've explored the moon or not. But of course, I want to avoid such arguments, and I want to instead, my focus today is to focus on the Bible and what are the evidences that the Bible provides for us that we live in a real environment. Okay, and this real environment was created by God, who wants us to explore space. I will be doing this. So, let's begin from the beginning, the book of the beginning, Genesis. And from Genesis chapter 1, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Of course, that is a claim that is being questioned by a lot of scientists who claim that there is no empirical evidence or scientific evidence that supports that claim. And when they are talking about that, they are talking of a physical person that can be attributed the term God, okay, or a cosmic person that can be measured scientifically, as we are all human beings measured scientifically. And of course, we have dealt with that before, and we have tried to debunk that. That is not adequate. Science does not have that adequate tool. It's not a concern of science to try to prove God. Okay, it doesn't have that. It is not equipped to do that. Okay, it doesn't have that purview. So that is just that. Okay, I don't want to go deep into that today either. I've done that in previous episodes. You go to the episode on reality. Okay, the first episode on reality, I dealt with that. So we're still on that. Okay, let's see what Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 to 31 offers us in terms of explaining the beginning. Okay, I remember Genesis, of course, is a Jewish document, part of the Jewish Torah, of course, imbibed and assimilated into Christianity. Okay, so let us understand. First of all, it claims that the world that God created, first God created the world, which is the universe, all the galaxies, includes the whole galaxies and everything. But as concerns the earth, it was formless and void, okay? And it was a water world. Of course, those who have traveled to space have corroborated the same evidence, and they have said that yes, the world out there is desolate, okay? Is deserts, from deserts to water worlds, to gaseous worlds, and all that, okay? Those that they've been able to verify, to worlds covered with molten lava and all that. And this is what we see, okay? But the earth was a water world. This is the much that we can get from the book of Genesis, okay? So there are scientists that have been able to trace the history of the earth based on their own observations, scientific calculations, and are saying, of course, that yes, there was a time the earth was a water world, okay? It's still partly a water world, but of course has land masses, okay? Is primarily made of rock. So that is what it is. It was first and foremost a water world according to the Bible. And the process of terraforming started. Of course, the Bible does not use the word terraforming, but that is the process that it describes in Genesis chapter 1, right through to verse 31. Okay? Terraforming began. And what was the first step in terraforming? Was first of all, the sun had to be available. Let there be light. And there was light. Okay? And when the sun was available, to now begin the process of now changing this state of being a water world to what now it began to transform into. You know, it necessitated the heat from the sun, and that is why the Bible tells us, he said, let there be light. Now, scientifically, there are questions to this, okay? If the sun was not yet illuminated, Earth could have been an ice world, okay? But that doesn't change the fact that, yes, the earth was void and without form, okay? And God hovered across the deep, over the deep, which is still consistent with that nature, though not in detail, of course. So yes, the world would have been an ice world. But when the sun was lit up, now the process of terraforming began. Of course, it heated up and water began to melt, the ice caps began to melt, and of course the atmosphere began to form, and it is still given in detail there in Genesis chapter 1. Okay? Now he separated what? The firmaments, okay? And he created the firmaments, the water of the on the earth and the water that formed the atmosphere. And these exposed the continents, okay? And that is exactly what we see going down to verse 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? And as a result of that, vegetation formed, okay? Exactly. There is no diversion here. There is no error here. The Bible describes that process to the very last detail, okay? To the point where sea creatures emerged, to the point where land creatures emerged, and finally human beings, or Homo sapiens in the scientific term, emerged, okay? So it describes that in detail to day 6. So on day 6, human beings were created, okay, and animals of the land were created, okay. So it's very, very clear. And when you trace the evolutionary trend, this has almost, if not exactly, a similar description when the people who stand by evolution describe how evolution took place, okay. So this is exactly what happened. So we have that in detail. There's no question about that in Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 to 31, and this is a document that is almost 5,000 years old, okay. In Genesis itself, about some people might cut it down to about 3,000 years, but it's about 5,000 years old, okay. When you look at the story itself, during the time of oral tradition, that it existed during the time of oral tradition, okay. So this is the issue. So this is very clearly spelled out, okay. So we have that, and we're going to be looking at what are the steps, the other evidences that we have beyond Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 to 31. What are the other evidences? This is the most powerful evidence that we have in Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 to 31. The most powerful evidence we have of the scientific viability of the Bible, okay, and the authenticity of those records, and of those that passed such information to the human beings that lived then. They must have been very powerful, very scientifically aware, and were probably involved in the process, okay. So we must know, and this adds credence to the existence of God, okay. So this is what I need to prove, okay, I've started to prove, and this is the most powerful evidence. We will talk more about the rest of the evidence after this.
Discover a transformative journey into the kingdom of heaven. Following the initial publication, the author dives deeper with 2 insightful follow-up books. Ever felt disconnected from God even in worship? Explore how God's unconventional ways can transform your life. How can you align with divine plans, avoiding distractions? Find answers in The Kingdom of Heaven on Earth and The 3, Illuminating Christian Truths and Prophetic Practices. Unlock profound insights guiding you toward a deeper connection with God. Don't miss out. Dive into this enlightening exploration today. Click the link on the caption to get your copy.
Okay, we've talked about Genesis 1 verse 31 as the most powerful source of evidence we have of the existence of God and of the very high scientific understanding of the ancient people of the earth. Okay, now we will continue from there to talk about certain parts of the Bible that are sometimes mostly disputed, but their role is to show us the real environment, the environment that existed during that time was a real environment. It was not a made up. These are not made up stories. These were oral traditions that were later recorded that revealed real events that are scientifically verifiable, okay. And one thing I have to point out though is that these scientific records, because of their very primitive nature, are not expected to give detailed scientific figures, okay, statistics, because in those days they did not have or had not developed those tools. Science was not developed that, so they recorded events as if they were telling stories. And of course, you know, in telling anecdotal stories, there were sometimes additions, there were sometimes because of memory, things were omitted. Okay, some things were changed to symbolisms. Okay, some things were turned to serve the purposes of religion. You know, and so of course you don't expect those detailed scientific results to come out. So yes, they are often disputed, but they also are very powerful evidence of the reality of the world that they lived in then, and we still have today. And one of those things is the story of the flood. Of course, that at a point in time, God punished the world, the inhabitants of the world, with a massive flood. The world was threatened with becoming a water world again. Okay, after about 1,000 years or more. Of course, those dates are also very debatable. They may have been shortened, may have been omitted. The lack of recording may have affected that, and so on and so forth. So the flood took place, was said to have took place. Okay, and the whole world was covered with water again. Okay, and the second time, and only one man and his family, called Noah, survived because he was able to build a boat, a very big boat, and was said to have preserved some species of animals. Now we're going to come back to this story later on, especially about the species of animals that were saved in this very story. Like I said, this story must not have been recorded in perfect detail, okay, but was a story anecdotal form, okay, given in anecdotal form. Some people, that's why it slowly became myth for some people, okay, but must have recorded a good amount of fact, okay. So this is the issue. The flood took place, and certain scientists I've mentioned before, like Professor McIntosh, okay, where I've been able to really research this from the scientific point of view, and for them it records a very significant event in the world that really changed the world and created the world that we live in today. Okay, so the world before the flood was significantly different from the world that we live in today, okay, geologically, okay, and also considering the biological life that existed on it, okay. And so for him, he was able to doubt the efficacy of carbon dating. Of course, this is a very contentious area, but he did so, okay, and other scientists have done that also, and they are on the side of the young Earth theory instead of, of course, my view is very clear. There is no, the fact that the Earth might be very old does not put significant doubt on the stories in the Bible, okay, because of the fact that the early people did not have those concerns, okay. Their concern was not to record those events in detail, okay. They were generally recorded general events, and were more concerned about what affected them there and then, okay. So this is what happened, okay. So the flood really took place and created a situation where only one man and his family were able to survive. And of course, this gives us the normative history of shipping technology, okay, the source of shipping technology. That shipping technology must have evolved from this time and age, and was preserved for us up to today, okay. And from that, very, very much, as evidence to prove this, from that time, of course, human beings began to traverse on the seas, began to trade with one another, on the seas, and that is one of the evidences. So that is the issue of the flood, okay. The flood is a very significant event, always doubted, but is a very significant proof of the world that we live in today, okay. So many floods happen on the earth, and even today we still experience very sudden climate events that sometimes affect just a localized area, but have global significance, okay. And I was able to look at this from one other aspect, and this aspect is the geology that NASA has been able to discover on the planet Mars, okay. There is very, very clear evidence that there was water on the planet Mars, and what it looks like is that at the time that the earth was a water world, and we're talking of the Genesis 1 scenario, of course, at that same time, there was life on Mars, and there was water on Mars, flowing on Mars, okay, and possibly an atmosphere, okay. So this is very, very clear. And at the time this water was receding, probably it was the same time that the earth was experiencing these very large-scale climate events that partly were recorded as the flood of Genesis chapter 6, okay, down to chapter 9. Okay, so this is what we see, okay. Of course, like I said, investigating the details is, of course, a very rigorous scientific activity, and of course, we might not be able to, but the Bible is not written to be able to do that. It is like a generalization, recording of the general events that took place within thousands of years for us, just to keep us to maintain some level of faith in us and to keep us doing what we're doing here on earth. Okay, so this is what it is. All right, so this, we need to understand this. So the flood is a very valid record that we must take seriously. Okay, and I'm not going to add the repetition of that same story in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It doesn't really, that is, for me, is not that important. Okay, for me, even the geological events we see up to today should give us that. And especially what we see in Genesis chapter 1 as relates to the scientific evidences recorded of the observation of the Martian surface. Okay, so this should be able to tell us that yes, the fact that the world was a water world and there were multiple climatic events related between Earth and Mars. Okay, if Earth was a water world, Mars would have had life on it, partially also having some water. Okay, as that reduced, the Earth became more evidently having continents, being very visible. The Mars became less so. Okay, became less a water world and more of a rocky planet. Okay, so this is just what it is. Okay, so another one that shows some of this geological activity that was taking place on Earth was the Sodom and Gomorrah event. Okay, the Sodom and Gomorrah event has been debated over centuries also, but also would be very similar to what happened to Pompeii. Okay, which is a very recent event and is there for us to compare. Okay, Pompeii suffered from a volcanic eruption, mudslide of sorts. And okay, that was very similar to possibly what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, though attributed to the punishment of God, is also valid evidence. Now, why would you would ask, why would the Bible attribute such an event to the punishment of God? Now, this is a theological issue, and is still a theological issue for us today. Okay, and when you visit cultures that still live in this very pre-modern setup, up to today, the lack of rain is attributed to the sin of the people. Okay, in very traditional cultures, they find there is the existence of people like rainmakers. Okay, people who pray for rain, and especially during the rainy season, they are able to show that there is something there. Okay, although it is fetish. Okay, and so these things keep on reminding us that there are other forces out there, not just human forces. Although we cannot scientifically, prove that they are there, but that they have some influence in these events. Those are some of those issues. And so, yes, there is evidence of geological activity throughout the Bible. Okay? Even on Christ's death, the third one is at Christ's death, there is the recording of an eclipse. That very night that Christ died, it recorded that the sky was shot, it became completely darkened by an unknown phenomenon. Okay, and it is recorded that yes, an eclipse took place at that very time, the time of Quirinius. Okay, a governor of that area called Quirinius. Okay, there was such an eclipse. Okay, so and that is what some of the evidences that we see. The one that it is extra biblical, but it is historical, is the one that also took place AD 600, and this coincides, has been quoted by so many historians and geologists that say that there was a volcano or multiple volcanoes that erupted during that period, AD 600 and AD 559 or so, and AD 600, that caused significant disruptions on the earth, especially as to human activity, that blotted out the sun. And this was also prophesied by the book of Revelations. So these are some of the evidences that we see that back up the Genesis 1 evidence, which can stand on its own. Okay, and so this is so very important, is the already established existence of dinosaurs. Okay, I told you we're going to go back to the flood story, and this is important. Paleontologists have already unearthed, and some of these things are on display, dinosaurs that are said to have existed millions of years ago. Okay, some more recently, thousands of years ago, but a lot of them millions of years ago. And they have discovered that it is possible that these creatures were killed by an asteroid, okay, that must have hit the Earth. The effects of the impact of an asteroid that must have hit the Earth millions of years ago, okay. So this is what we see. This is their own measurement. This brings in the issue of the doubt of Professor McIntosh as to the measurements, okay, carbon dating, okay, when did the flood really occur, okay. Of course, when you go to the story of Noah himself, there are a lot of issues, there are a lot of possibilities here. How old really, and some of these things are, the questions are, how old really is human civilization, okay? And some of the Neolithic and megalithic structures that have been discovered on the earth, not yet fully explained, kind of cast some of questions, not doubts, but questions into some of these dates. The issue is dating. Are we getting the dates right? Okay, this is the major question. Okay, and many such archaeological discoveries are still being unearthed. Okay, so how old is human civilization? When did the flood really occur, truly occur? Okay, was it just a few thousand years back, or was it 1,000,000 years ago, or more? Okay, so this is the question that we continue. Were there just one flood or multiple floods? So this is the question, okay, and we keep on saying that the Bible is not written to answer all those questions. It is written to answer specific questions, okay, to maintain that idea of the reality of the existence of God, and to describe the purpose of human civilization in the eyes of this God, okay. And so this is just what it is. And of course, people have the right to question this, yes, if they do not believe, yes, but my purpose today is just to highlight the reality, okay, the reality of the situation, okay, that there is someone out there that is deliberately, that is thousands of years old, and deliberately recording events. Now we have to accept that, okay. I'm going to do another series on Nostradamus, which is another very complicated and very complex thing, but that is not my view. That is not a biblical document. It's another thing. Talking about prophecy on its own, okay? Where is the source of prophecy? Why do some prophecies show a lot of efficacy? Okay, if we are so concerned about scientific evidence, okay? So this is just the thing. And somebody who is very old is giving us data that we should take seriously, especially from Genesis 1, verse 1 to 31, okay? So this is just the issue. I have not even talked about names that occur in Genesis 1 through to Genesis 11, okay, that seem to give such signals as to a scientific reality. Okay, so this is just the truth of it. Okay, the fact that the earth is in the habitable zone is very clear, as to some of the names in the Bible, and that very whole chapter in the Bible. Okay, so this is just the thing, and okay, we can go on and on in that light. Okay, so dinosaurs are some of the normative evidences that we have. The fact that it is written that Noah actually preserved a specific set of species of animals on the ark shows us very clearly that a certain group were neglected, okay, were not part of that. And this very coincides very delicately with the death of the dinosaurs and the survival of the mammals, okay. So this is just it. What was the nature of the ark? And it gives us that question. This is that question. What was the nature of the ark? Was it a wooden ship, as it were, or was it more complicated than that? Did the story evolve due to the less complicated nature of the human beings that existed after the flood? There is evidence also to this, okay, that the human beings that lived after the flood, as recorded in the Bible, were far less superior to the ones that could have created or lived before the flood. Okay, so this is just what it is. Okay, even some of the stories of Atlantis seem to have such scattered details. Okay, and I want to add here that the nature of the recording of some of these ancient documents shows a lot of afterthought. And some critics tend to use this existence of an afterthought to debunk the whole document. But for me, it shouldn't be always so, okay? The afterthought in a written document or the editing of various documents and bringing them together sometimes is also evidence of somebody trying to bring together, things he knows to be true. Okay, so it is not always is true that an edited document bringing bits and pieces is always a forgery. No, it might be trying to prove in his own time that there are sources he can quote from that recreate the old story or bring a similarity. It may not always be the genuine similarity, but a possibility. Okay, so he's trying to create a possibility, and this is what we see in those similarities between the Epic of Gilgamesh and the biblical Torah. Okay, so this is the issue. So we must be able to understand this. Okay, so dinosaurs were eliminated while mammals took over. Okay, and other species like the avian species and other reptiles, other smaller reptiles, okay, not the bigger ones. So this is what we see very clearly, okay, and we see scientists still talking about the same phenomenon, okay. If the earth were to be destroyed today, how do you preserve the human species? Okay, you must find a way to preserve them, whether in a spaceship or as embryos, okay. So will you preserve everything? No, you will pick the ones that probably would survive, okay, in that new environment you want them to survive. So this is just the thing, and this is exactly what the story of Noah gives to us, okay. So we must understand this. I have talked again about the similarity, those allegorical similarities in the story of Noah as to our present generation. You can read from that if you order from me directly, okay. So this is what it is. So you can inbox me for a copy of the Foundations of Conceptuality, okay, volume 1, okay, to get some of those discussions, okay. So this is it. So we will try to round up with this episode as we look into what these evidences should mean for us in our time. Okay, for people who practice Christianity, who are into religion, okay, yes, it is very important for us to know why these things are important. Sometimes we have a way of shutting out any science when we're talking about religion, and then we shut out any religion when we're talking about science. And this creates a lot of confusion. Okay, so what should this mean for us? And I try to discuss this continuously every time I talk, because these things come up. Okay, a very important book, and presently I am going through that book, I'm reading that book, is the book of Ezekiel, as also is Revelations, as also is Genesis. Okay, these are very important books that help us to really understand these things. Okay, and we see that God of the Israelites was actually a God that discouraged mysticism and encourage more of a practical approach to religion, to worship. Okay, the Israelites were encouraged to worship God in the more practical manner, and what he did was to create the sense of an invisible God. Okay, and pictures of different servants and guards that surrounded him, like the angels that were pictured as spirits that had wings, okay, or creatures that had wings. Okay, a lot of people have their own interpretation of what wings mean. That wings mean ruah, which is air, okay, which is attributed to the spirit, of course. But there are other things that surround this. Okay, yes, this is true. But wings also means mobility, and the same spirit of ruah means mobility, ability to move silently without any hindrance. So it's the same thing. Okay, so don't be too taken by the excessive emphasis on the Hebrew. It's very important, but don't be too taken by it. The translators have taken their time to make sure that these things transfer the same meaning in the English or in the Latin, okay, or in any other language. Okay, so don't be too taken by that. What I'm trying to say here is for you to be able to understand what this means in real terms. Okay, so that you don't separate religion from real life. These two things, the Bible, I don't believe the Bible wanted to do that. The Bible wanted to help those early human beings to be able to manage the world they lived in, because they did not have science. They did not really have the capability to develop science as we have it today. Okay, so religion was meant to help them to navigate this more easily. And so we see this in the book of Ezekiel. Okay, this is what God was able to do through the prophet Ezekiel. Okay, move them from that state of being to a better state of being. Now, we have to talk about the book of Revelation also, okay? The book of Revelation also. And the book of Revelation is an apocalyptic book, okay? It records the final, what is supposed to happen at the end, okay? And majorly, actually, it was written for the sake of the church, okay? The Christian church that started about AD 30 to AD 90, between those years, and continued to progress until the time that Constantine took over. Okay, John the Apostle himself was said to have lived around AD 90, and that is when he wrote the book, and died subsequently after that. Some, of course, cast doubt on whether he died or not. Okay, so this is just the thing. But he wrote this book, and it is a book describes apocalyptic events. Okay, so it describes apocalyptic events. Okay, and of course you go to the book The Kingdom of Heaven on Earth, the works of a silent crusader, to see some of the interpretations, especially when it comes to the seals revealed in that book. Okay, they will give you a more current insight into interpretation of the book of Revelation, it is expected that some of these things will be fulfilled, okay? And when they are being fulfilled, we have more information as to those allegorical contents of the book of Revelations, okay? Which prophecy is most likely, okay? So you go to the book, The Kingdom of Heaven on Earth, okay? And it reveals some of these things. As fulfillments take place, we update our knowledge of interpretation of such books like Revelation, okay? So it is an apocalyptic book, and some of the apocalypse is supposed to record the final events of the earth, the destiny of the human race, of humanity itself, and what will happen on earth. And of course, one of the things we see is, especially in Revelation chapter 21, the existence of that the earth itself will be destroyed in some kind of event, and there will be another earth, okay? And a very, very clear description there is that there will be no sea, okay? There will be no sea, there will be no water. Now, this is very, very unique, and because of this, like I have mentioned before, this reminds of another planet like the planet Mars, where there is no sea, okay? So this is it. So, but this is not really, we can't really put a lot of stock in this because of the allegory that is present, because the existence of the sea itself means that it represents, for some interpreters, the nations, okay? And of course, there will be no nations. And when he says there will be no nations, that means everybody will be one, as it continues to say, that all human beings will exist under the same banner, just one whole nation, okay? But if we're to take it literally, of course, it means that somewhere, the earth will be somewhere like Mars, okay? And of course, it will take a lot of technology to keep that place running. And it continues to say that the light will be constant. There will be no night, okay? It will be day throughout. So you see, that is the kind of situation you might expect in a artificially terraformed place like Mars, okay, or artificially fixed up place like Mars, okay. So this is very, very clear. So we're still expecting to see, is this what the Bible is recording, or is it another thing, okay? So this is just the thing. All right. So this is what I don't want to be too optimistic. Don't want to pull people's minds too much. People are already fixated on this, okay? And of course, the threat is that, like we continually expect in Christianity, we experience in Christianity. Some people say Jesus is coming in the year 2011. Some will say 2012. Others will say 2020. Others, and it doesn't happen, and people lose faith. The same extremist philosophy is showing itself in the science community, and if this doesn't happen, of course, people will lose faith, and that is why governments don't put their money into research and development of space anymore. So we need to be very concerned about this, and we need to be open-minded, and in this we need to now play down on our excessive emphasis on prophecy. Instead, we should encourage emphasis on a commitment to humanity, okay, which is already proven biblically that Christ came for humanity. So when we shift our focus from a commitment to prophetic or miraculous occurrences and a commitment to humanity, as Jesus did, we will probably get it right, okay? So this is what I want to encourage us to do in this episode. And this is the focus of a lot of my ministry. I am for you today, David Tunji Chinke, in Searching the Heart.